Hello and welcome to the third session of this course. Today we're going to start talking about those magnificent polymers that we eat. Yes, polymers are not only plastics, because long before plastics, the concept existed in nature. And the biggest and most important polymers that are of significant and relevance to what we're talking about are carbohydrates and proteins. Now, I don't know if I can talk about both at the same time, because to give them justice, I think I should be talking about one of them at a time. So I will talk in this session here, session number 3, only about carbohydrates because they're simpler and easier to understand than the concept of the polymer of protein. Now, I do apologize for people who know these things already, because remember that these sessions are designed basically for people who want to learn about these things but don't have a background in sciences as such. Okay, so what's a carbohydrate? As the term indicates, carbohydrates. So carbo stands for carbon. Hydrate, the term hydrate, if you think of hydration, dehydration, it means water, really. So carbohydrate is a political term, if you like, that incorporates carbon with water. But what is water? Water is hydrogen and oxygen. So in essence, carbohydrates are substances that are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Now, of course, not everything that has carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen is a carbohydrate, but that's another story. Let's not get into that. Now, the simplest form of carbohydrates are the ones that are just the first outcome of photosynthesis, because plants use the solar energy, they use carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and water, and they put them together through that process of photosynthesis to produce the simple sugars. Now, there are two main simple sugars that they produce: glucose and fructose. They both have the same formula, but they have a slightly different chemical structure. You will find glucose and fructose like as they are in saps of fruits and fruit juices and stuff like that, but they are more commonly found in combination with each other. Now, when you get glucose and fructose and you combine them together, you'll get sugar, the table sugar that we buy from supermarkets. But you're not going to get a polymer of fructose. It doesn't polymerize. Glucose, on the other hand, does. So if you get two molecules, and they're sort of like ball-shaped of glucose, and you bind them together, you get maltose. A longer chain is called dextrin. And then a much, much longer chain is known as starch. Now, let's not get bogged down with the naming. That's not important. What's important for us is to understand the relevance of these things when it comes to our nutrition. Now, when plants synthesize glucose and they put it together to form starch, they can also do the opposite. So when a fruit is growing and it's tasteless, it's basically because it is accumulating starch. Now, the process of ripening involves many things like changing color. So when you get a green banana, it turns yellow. So that's something different, which we don't need to dwell into. But chemically speaking, from the point of carbohydrate is concerned, what's happening to that starch is that it's actually turning back into glucose. This is why it becomes sweet. It's not like that sugar appeared from nowhere. It was already there. But the process of ripening, because the banana is still alive, it's got those enzymes in it, and they're working on breaking down that complex molecule of starch and turning it into glucose. So it's helping us with digestion, because when we ingest starch, we have to break it down to glucose before our body can take it up through the intestine into our guts and use it for energy. So let's look at this now from the molecular point of view to get a better understanding, perhaps. A starch molecule looks like something like this. This little circle, each one of them is a glucose molecule. Now, of course, here in this chain we only have 5, but a starch molecule will have hundreds, maybe even thousands of those. So they're bound together with a bond, And when we digest it, whether we are doing this or the fruit is ripening naturally, it doesn't matter. This bond is breaking. When you break the bond, that's digestion. So digestion is really breaking the bond, taking a very large molecule and turning it into a small molecule. Now, there's a difference between why we digest carbohydrates to why we digest protein. And we'll talk about this later on. Because in the case of protein, when we break it down, we want to rebuild it our way. But in the case of carbohydrate, when we break it down, we mainly want to change it into a form of energy that we can use. So there's a big difference. Now, look at those little circles. You see that they bound together with those little bonds. It's as if every glucose molecule has two little arms that go down. So it looks like this. But there's another form of glucose which is very, very similar. It's almost identical, except that those two arms are like that. Funny, isn't it? Or like that, in whichever way you like. And when those bind to each other, they form another form of carbohydrate, one that we cannot digest. And this one is called cellulose or fiber. So fiber is actually a carbohydrate. The reason why we cannot digest it is because our bodily enzymes are not designed to break that bond. Because those enzymes, remember, are extremely specific. One little change in the substance that they act on, which is referred to as the substrate, little change in the substrate make it unidentifiable by the enzyme, and it can't act on it. So it just leaves it alone. However, ruminants, animals with compound stomachs, like cows, sheep, goats, they have bacteria in their stomach that will break down this bond. And they will enable those animals to actually digest, the complex form of cellulose and turn it into food. But we can't do that. So we use that form of carbohydrate as fiber just to clean our guts, just as an intestinal broom. Now, I think we don't need to really dwell into this much more. So I will just briefly introduce the concept of the difference between a simple carbohydrate and a complex carbohydrate. Okay? Now you've heard the term low GI and high GI carbohydrate. What's the difference between the two? They're all formed of units of glucose, all of them. The difference, however, in the simple one is that the chain here is straight. Okay? So to digest this, it's easy, it's quick. So you take this, you eat it like starch, just normal starch, and that's what starch is like. And your body will be able to digest it in a few minutes. And as a result, your blood will get a surge of glucose. So this is a substance of high GI, high glycemic index. Now, this is not a favorable type of carbohydrate for your nutrition because your body, if you want to take it easy on your system, on your pancreas, and on all of your organs, it's better that you get a slow release form. And to get a slow release form, you go for something that's more complex in structure instead of getting a straight line. And this is a simplified complex form, really, because you'll get branches all over the place. And it will take longer for our body to break all of these enzymes and release this glucose. So it's a slower release form. So this is something with a low GI, low glycemic index. So there you go, high GI, low GI. I hope this is clear. Thank you very much.